Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. Last week we started the remarkable story of service of General Ted Hopgood, telling the story of his 3 tours of Vietnam in the Marines. But there's another 25 years to cover before he even gets to Texas A&M to start his 6 years as Commandant of Cadets. Please welcome back to Veterans of the Valley, General Ted Hopgood. When last we were visiting, we were leaving Vietnam. This was in November of 1970, after your 3rd and final tour of Vietnam. Sort of take us after that. And I asked you at the end of last show if you were certain at that time that you were going to stay in the Marines and be a career guy, and you said definitely you were.
Definitely I was, yes.
And so sort of take us after that. I think first stop, Washington, D.C., where you had continuing education at the University of Virginia, but you weren't a resident student.
Well, when I came back from Vietnam, I was assigned as an instructor to the basic school at Quantico to teach second lieutenants, which was a great assignment. A captain, hard chargers with all the people we had to instruct was a wonderful experience. And then I got picked. The Marine Corps is great for picking you to go to Washington, D.C. to work in the headquarters, to work in the assignment of infantry captains and artillery and tankers and so forth. About 1,500 officers to work in the assignment of. So I was during this time. As mentioned, I was pursuing a master's degree in education from the University of Virginia, but it was in my own time. So in the evenings, twice a week, we would go to class, and in the last semester was having to drive all the way down to Charlottesville, Virginia, to about a 2-hour drive, as I recall, go to class for 3 hours and drive home, get home shortly after midnight, and go to bed and get up the next morning bright and early to head back to duty.
Hey, but you were young, you were tough. You'd been to Vietnam for 3 tours.
You can do it all, sure.
You could do it all.
Right.
Talk about your assignment in Washington. You assigned infantry captains. You were responsible for pretty much where 1,500 folks went, right?
Yeah, I certainly was. It was a challenging assignment, and the good aspect was that you really got to know and work with all of your contemporaries, and you established relationships. The ones that got the good orders became good friends. And the ones that they got orders they weren't so happy about might have been not quite so good friends, but it was a great way to get to know the Marine Corps and get to know a lot of people.
Then to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and then I guess sort of a rite of passage of anybody in the military is, especially an officer, you go to jump school. You go to Fort Benning, and you learn to jump whether you need to jump or not.
Right. En route to Camp Lejeune, I went to Fort Benning in the middle of the summer. I think it was 1975, and went to jump school for 3 weeks and got my jump wings, but 5 jumps, but never jumped after that, and it was a good experience. I was the senior officer in the class as a major, so those wonderful Army drill sergeants made sure that I met the requirements. But
and in your retirement, you've never had the desire to jump again,
no,
right? Five's enough, right?
Never did it again, no.
Newport, Rhode Island, Naval War College. I want you to talk about this, not only what you did, but also a relationship that you were able to develop with Admiral James Stockdale, who not so recent historians will remember as a vice presidential running mate with Ross Perot many years ago, but you remember him as quite a Navy man.
Vice Admiral Stockdale was the president of the Naval War College during my year of residency in Newport, Rhode Island. And he had been awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroic conduct as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And Admiral Stockdale was a wonderful individual who shared his experiences with the students. And he had an experience that he would do once every 10 days, once every 2 weeks, called the President's Hour, where he would assemble everybody in both the junior class and the senior class, about 500 officers in this large auditorium, and talk about his experiences or what had recently happened or something news of the day. And the most enlightening time was when he would take questions. And I remember this one day that his presentation had been somewhat routine. I won't say boring because senior officers are never boring. But the question came from a Marine aviator in the class, because the Admiral had talked about what was required to survive under arduous conditions, i.e. being a POW. Some people had constructed a house in their mind down to every detail. Some people had made a slide rule in their mind, those types of things. So he also talked about the importance of Christianity. that was necessary for certain people to survive in a POW environment. So the Marine Lieutenant Colonel, I was a major, the Marine Lieutenant Colonel asked him the question. He said, "Admiral, I've listened closely to what you had to say, and are you telling us that to be a good soldier, you have to be a good Christian?" And the Admiral said, "Well, I take your question to mean that good soldier includes Marine, Navy, Coast Guardsmen, whatever." And the person acknowledged that was correct. And this was a tough question, because just think of yourself before I tell you what the Admiral's response was, how you would answer that question. And the Admiral gave it deep thought, walked across the stage several times, and then he said, "You know," he said, "I've known too many good soldiers in my career who weren't Christians, but I've never known a soldier who was a Christian who wasn't a better soldier because of it." Mm-hmm. I thought that was profound wisdom, and something that I have obviously remembered to this day, and passed that story along more than once during my career in similar situations.
He was quite an individual. There's no doubt about it. Unfortunately, I guess, when people remember him in that element of the politics, not too many years back, and that was sort of out of his element a little bit, and there were jokes about him and all of that, but there was nothing joking about this man. Obviously, he made a very, very big impression on you.
He did.
And all the people that served under him. After Newport, Rhode Island, you went to Australia for 7 months with your family, and you really enjoyed that tour.
Well, it was a tough tour, but as we say, somebody had to do it. And the school was in Canberra, Australia. I was the only Yank in the class, and there was 35 students in the class. We had an opportunity to travel throughout the South Pacific and all through Australia, and it was a broadening experience, not only for me but for my family, because our 2 daughters were enrolled in school in Australia, and just the camaraderie and the friendships that were extended to us during that experience were very memorable and deeply appreciated by me and my family.
I know that you described the leaders there as really top-notch people. One Colonel Jim Conway is now the Commandant of the Marine Corps. He worked for you back then, right?
Well, it wasn't in Australia that,
right.
that Jim worked for me. Jim worked for me later in Quantico.
Right. I jumped ahead.
When I was back in Quantico working as my last tour in the Marine Corps, I had a number of really, really high-quality people that worked for me, including the current Commandant of the Marine Corps, Colonel Jim Conway, a colonel at the time, now 4-star General and Commandant of the Marine Corps, member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, etc. But yes, I did. That was one of the real memorable things of a Marine Corps career, was the number of people that you worked for that were outstanding Americans, and then the far greater number that worked for you, to include certainly your troops and your subordinate officers that were just inspirational by their talents and their dedication, and Jim Conway was certainly one of those people.
You very proudly held a master's in education, but that didn't cut much mustard with some of those people, right?
Well, when I was at Quantico, I had 17 PhDs that worked for me at the Marine Corps University, and when you're in charge of any organization, you want to make sure that you understand what all your people are doing and get to know them and so forth. But 17 PhDs was a challenge. I don't know if I ever totally understood, but I certainly greatly respected all that they did.
One of your most memorable tours, and for good reason, of course, is as a Brigadier General at the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. You described it to me that you never played in a Super Bowl, but you can imagine that was what it would be like, that job. I want you to tell us a lot about that, because it's quite an interesting story.
Well, all the days at the Pentagon always seemed like they started like at 03 or 04 in the morning, because you had to be in there early. And when Desert Shield and Desert Storm came along, I was in the position of working in the National Military Command Center, and I often found myself briefing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who was Colin Powell, as well as the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney. And the number of slides you could use was restricted to 32, so you started building, I guess you'd call it your slideshow, a half-hour slideshow with 32 slides. You started building at about 04 in the morning to be ready to go at 07. And when you got up to brief, you'd sometimes been so busy getting the slides ready that you really hadn't got your presentation down perhaps as smoothly as you might if you could really rehearse it. But they were so interested in the content because they were making some very significant decisions based on the information that you presented. So you wanted to make sure you had the information there, but you also wanted to make sure that you could present it in such a manner that they could rapidly comprehend it. So I remember the pressure of it, but it was a type of pressure that that you knew what you were doing was important, and you knew that with the backup of your team, that was something that you were doing well.
You had a team of about 25, right?
Yes, I did. In fact, on my team of 25 were 2 Navy captains who later became the Chief of Naval Operations, which is the senior position in the United States Navy. So I was surrounded, I assure you, by significant talent. And but watching Colin Powell and Dick Cheney work, I was so amazed and appreciative of the type of talent that would rise to the top, and that our country and all the men and women in uniform were really, truthfully, in the hands of really competent, good people.
We all can remember, many of us certainly can remember, the night that Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. I think most Americans were up all night watching television with the reporters with the gas mask on that night. You were in Washington at that time. Talk about that day and that night.
Well, the fact of it is, when the Iraqis crossed into Kuwait, I was coming on duty at 2000, 8 p.m. at night, and the off-going duty officer just happened to be a 1965 classmate of mine from Texas A&M, a brigadier general at that time in the Air Force, Hale Burr. So we made the transition from his watch to my watch, not only for me but for our teams. And then during the next 8 hours, it wasn't chaotic, but it was very fast-paced. I remember changing the DEFCON, defense condition, from 5 down to 2, of turning around a carrier battle group that was in the Indian Ocean. I remember working with the White House Situation Room to freeze all the Iraqi assets and all the banks in the United States. I remember with some, I guess, fun of having to call the ready room of the 101st and the 82nd Airborne Divisions, as well as the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions, and put them on alert and tell them what was going on, etc. So it was a fast-paced night that passed rapidly, and the next morning when the other team came in and General Powell and his group came into work, I felt like we were turning over something that was, at least if it wasn't running smoothly, at least it was all set for them to make the necessary decisions.
Indeed. We've got some photographs of, we had some photographs last week. We've got some new ones this week of post-Vietnam, and we'd like to go ahead and go to those right now and have General Hopgood talk about them. Here you are. Tell me where this was and what was the...
This was in Thailand. I was the J3 in charge of operations for the Pacific Command, and you can see in the background, just in the far background of the troops that were lined up. I remember that was a very hot day on an airfield in Thailand, and thankfully it was a short speech, but that's where that was.
Yeah. The people in the background were thankful it was a short speech. Is that inspection?
This is I was a lieutenant colonel in this position. I was a battalion commander at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in Parris Island, South Carolina. I'm inspecting an M16 rifle for a young recruit who's about ready to graduate from recruit training and join the operational forces of the Marine Corps.
Okay.
This picture is at Camp Pendleton, California. It's a change of command where I was taking over the command of the 1st Force Service Support Group there at Camp Pendleton. Once again, I can tell by the audience they hope the remarks are short, and I think I probably kept them short, and we moved on.
This next photograph is one that I was able to find. We talked about Vice Admiral Stockdale, and here he is returning from his time as a POW in Vietnam.
Yes, that's his wife, Sybil, in the background, and that's his 3 boys. And that's a welcome home in Southern California, and you can just tell how thin and gone he is, that the experience he underwent as a POW in Vietnam was extremely arduous for him and his fellow prisoners.
That's quite a photograph. Here's a little bit later in life when you were a marathon runner.
Well, by the anguish on my face, it must be near the end. I was probably happy to finish, but that's a shot of a Marine Corps marathon in Washington, D.C. I was never a record setter, but did it to try and stay in shape and to keep my exercise level up, and I always enjoyed running throughout my life.
Some wonderful pictures. I want to move on because I want to get you to Texas A&M in 1996, but you also had a tour in Somalia, and that made quite an impression on you, to say the least, because you're talking about Somalia and the lawlessness that you described there.
Well, the time in Somalia was near the end of President Bush 41's first tour, or I mean his tour's presidency, and we went there in December, and to go into a city of several million people that have no police force, no schools, no hospitals, but have plenty of weapons was extremely challenging. And I'm very proud to this day of the response that our Marines did while we were there. And I remember being in command of some 1,800 Marines and sailors, and was able to bring every one of them back home after, counted them, 73 days on the ground in Mogadishu, Somalia, and very hot, very dirty, and I'll say dangerous from the fact of personal safety and health.
You were promoted to Major General, then to Hawaii, Director of Operations of Pacific Command, working for a 4-star. Talk about that tour of duty.
Well, the tour out in Hawaii was the command had responsibility for all the U.S. forces everywhere in the Pacific, all the way to the country of India. So Australia, Japan, Korea, and being in charge of operations, it was a tremendous amount of travel. So your time away from Hawaii to see people, to check on how things are going, and then to come back and have to play catch up for 2 weeks was extremely demanding. But living in Hawaii certainly has its pluses. I just wish I could have enjoyed the scenery more, but it was a good place for Carolyn and the kids to be.
We've got about 9 minutes to talk about 6 years at Texas A&M, so we're going to fast forward to that fall of 1996. Talk about how you came to be able to have the honor to come back to your alma mater as Commandant of Cadets.
Well, Tom Darling, my predecessor, who did a great job with the Corps, was retiring from being the Commandant of the Corps, and there was a national search that went on, and I put my hand as high in the air as I could get, came in for the interview process, and was fortunately selected to come back to Texas A&M as the Commandant. So I quickly retired from the Marine Corps and got here in August of 1996, and as you said, spent 6 years here and thoroughly enjoyed my time working with the Corps of Cadets. I'm proud to say that the size of the Corps did not shrink during my 6 years, and the quality of the young men and women that were in the Corps was just marvelous. Just as talented and as motivated young men and women as you could ever imagine. Of course, we know this about Aggies, but my part was the Corps, and what I saw was just fantastic. And then in the subsequent years, since I left in 2002, to watch their progress, whether it's on military duty or in the private sector or growth of families or going back to weddings, is just it's a wonderful experience.
General Darling, who was your predecessor, has been in that chair, I'm very proud to say, and has been a guest here on Veterans of the Valley. You talked about how it retained its size while you were in there. It was not, there were ups and downs, obviously, when you're 6 years, and of course one of the big downs, not only for the Corps, but for the entire student body, the community, and the state of Texas, was in November of 1999.
Well, in November of 99, when the bonfire collapsed, 12 Aggies tragically killed, numerous others tragically injured. But of the 12 killed, 6 were in the Corps at the time, and 3 had been in the Corps. And the impact that it made on everybody associated with Texas A&M, but once again, my portion was the Corps, was very sad. It was significant, and something that We had to really experience leadership, compassion, to get through as well as we did.
You talked about some of the accomplishments. One of them I know you're very proud of, the review stand over at the Simpson Drill Field.
Right.
You were here when they constructed that
right,
permanent.
the review stand
right.
on Simpson Drill Field with the great assistance and financial support of Jim Kelly from Brenham and his class to construct and put that reviewing stand over on the drill field to mark, if you will, Simpson Drill Field is permanent ownership for the Corps of Cadets for reviews was something that I and everybody that was associated with the project are extremely proud of. And to see it today when driving by in front of the MSC or driving by the drill field, I always take a great deal of satisfaction in that.
One thing we didn't talk about the other day that I'll sort of throw at you is obviously the relationship that has been forged between Texas A&M and former President Bush. And I know that you were, as Commandant of Cadets, while he was developing his library and had his library here, I know that that's a relationship and a friendship that you treasure. Well,
President Bush is 41, is tremendous record of service in World War II as a naval aviator. And then his association with the Corps, everything from the dedication of his library, in which the Ross Volunteers, the Corps of Cadets, the Aggie Band were prominently featured, was significant. The numerous times that he has included the Corps in presentations of national and international personalities that have come to Texas A&M has certainly enriched the Corps of Cadets. His personal friendship with me and with other leaders of the Corps has been continuous, and it's been substantial and very helpful in so many ways on a personal basis as well as an organizational basis for the Corps.
We've got about 3 minutes left. I want you to talk about your family. We talked about Carolyn. You've been married for 41 years and you have 2 daughters. And so talk about your family. You've got time to brag on them right now.
Carolyn was in the United States Navy, and her dad is a retired Navy captain, and her brother is a retired Navy admiral, so she comes from a service family. And we've had a wonderful, fulfilling marriage. We have 2 daughters. One, Jennifer, our oldest, is currently at the University of Houston Law School. She graduated from Cal Berkeley and has an advanced degree from that school in Austin. And our youngest daughter, Catherine, is through and through Aggie, as is her husband. She's got both her undergraduate and graduate degrees from Texas A&M, and Catherine and her husband, Barry, are the proud parents of our 2 grandchildren, Michael and Elizabeth, 9 and 7 years old at the current time, and want to be and hope to be Aggies in waiting.
Do you get to see enough of them?
Oh, as much as we can. It seems like once or twice a month we are with the grandkids, and we enjoy every minute we spend with them.
What are some of the things that you're doing now in retirement? I know you're involved with your church. What else?
Well, the church work is very fulfilling. Travel, I think this past summer, in a 4-month period, we made 5 trips from East Coast, West Coast, North and South, so we do a lot of travel. And, of course, staying reasonably fit to include a lot of golf helps, yard work, and really enjoying life here in the College Station area. And of course, keeping a close track of Aggie athletics is always enjoyable also.
Yeah, I know. You make the games, and I know you told me that one of the big thrills was athletically was going to that Big 12 championship game where they beat Kansas State.
Well,
yeah.
In 1998,
right.
For those, many Aggies I know were there, but for you that weren't, it was about, it was a sold-out house in the Dome in St. Louis, and it was about 80% purple and white, and about the rest of us were Aggies. And as you might recall, A&M won in overtime with a pass to Sir Parker, and as the celebration was long and continuous, and by the time we were done sawing varsity's horns off for the I don't know how many times and so forth, it came time for the band to leave, and had traveled up there. My wife and I had traveled up with the band. So there was a tunnel that we had to go out, and on the way out to the tunnel, because it was light rain was falling outside, it was just full of Kansas State supporters. And I said to myself, based on past experiences, oh, this is going to be a challenge. But as the Aggie band started down the tunnel And the way the Aggie band marches when they're not playing their weapons is the click, if you will, of the drumsticks on the metal part of the drums.
Right.
And so the Aggie band starts marching down the tunnel, and the Kansas State fans, great fans, bless their hearts, backed up against the wall, and as the Aggie band marched through, they began to applaud, and then louder. So here we are, winning the Big 12 championship, marching through the stands, and somehow the buses in this rain, the Aggie band buses were right outside the entrance, and the Kansas State buses were off in the distance. So we got on the buses, and
it made you feel great.
It was
We're out of time.
We're out of time.
Great story, and thank you very much for your service and for being with us for 2 weeks.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. You have seen and heard over the last 2 shows. What you've heard is only a fraction of Ted Hopgood's story of service, a 31-year Marine who made a round trip of sorts from his alma mater, A&M, and back more than 30 years later to head up the Corps. Ted and Carolyn Hopgood have been married for 41 years. We salute their service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.